board doc?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh,
Shall we get started? So I'm assuming we are live.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Rosie Pryor. I am the chair of the Lane Community College Board of Education, and I am calling to order the Wednesday, October 19th, 2022 board meeting. And I would like to ask Celia to call the roll.
Austin Fulnagi,
here.
Steve Mattel,
Over here.
Holly Johnson,
Present.
Mike Eister,
Here.
Rosie Pryor,
Here.
Lisa Fragala.
Present.
I'm here too. Angela Van Kraus. Present.
We're all present and accounted for. Our first order of business is a land recognition, and I would like to call on Russ Pearson.
I need to be where I can be seen, or are you good right here?
I think you're good.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to start our meeting with the acknowledgement that the land we are on is the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people, primarily in the Eugene Springfield area, the Siuslaw, the Lower Umpqua, and the Coos tribes over here in this area. They were all stewards of this very land for over 14,000 years before their traditional way of life was forever disrupted and destroyed. We start our meeting with humility and reverence for the original inhabitants, the Kalapuya, the Siuslaw, the Coos, and the Lower Umpqua Indians.
Thank you very much. Members of the board, is there a motion to adopt this evening's agenda?
Second.
That was Holly, seconded by Austin. Would you call the roll for voting, please?
Yes. Austin Fulnagi,
Yes.
Steve Mattel,
Aye.
Holly Johnson,
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Rosie Pryor,
Aye.
Lisa Fragala,
Aye.
Angela Van Kraus.
Thank you very much, members of the board. Our first discussion item this evening is a review of some board policies. Dr. Bolger?
Yes, so I'd like to go ahead and introduce Michael Blade to talk about the policies that the board has received. Mike?
Great, thank you, Dr. Bolger. So for all of you that remember, we talked, it was a while back, that we were going to expand this from doing 5 or 6 to approximately 10. So in your packet, you've got 10 board policies. We also discussed, rather than me going through each and every one of them, that I would just hit a couple of high points and then answer questions. So I did want to point out that a couple of these policies have optional language that I think you all are going to need to decide whether you want to include or not. And there's a couple other things I wanted to point out. In 3820, which is the gifts policy, it does have optional language about accepting donations from a donor who might engage in policies which discriminate. Given this board's predilection for non-discrimination and diversity, equity, and inclusion, I would guess that you are probably interested in adopting that optional language, but that's the first one.
And which policy again is
That
that?
was 3820 gifts.
Thank you.
The policy 3570, this is not an optional language, but I want to bring it to your attention so that you all can consider it. 3570, which is the smoking and other tobacco use and possession on campus. If you look at the current Lane policy, the last sentence of the first paragraph and the sentence that makes up the entirety of the second paragraph discusses allowing FDA-approved nicotine replacement therapy products for the purposes of smoking cessation. It also talks about limited exemptions to the anti-tobacco policy may be allowed when tobacco has a ceremonial use. Those are items that I thought that you all may want to include, which would not be a problem to include in if you do adopt the OCCA policy, you may want to consider adding those two sentences to the OCCA policy, which does not include them.
Just a quick clarification. Didn't we already have policies though for like the Longhouse, for instance, to be didn't we have an existing policy for like buildings like the Longhouse?
I didn't see them.
Okay.
Policies, they may be in COPS rather
Okay.
than in the board policies.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but yeah, gotcha.
And I think that's probably why this limited exemption for ceremonial use is included in the current board policy for that very reason.
Yeah.
And there may be other areas where we use tobacco products for ceremonial use, but I would think the longhouse would be certainly one,
Yeah.
if not the only one.
Gotcha. Excellent. Thank you.
The next policy, again, this is not an optional language. This is something you may want to include. If you look at policy 3540, which is sexual and other assaults on campus, the current policy has a statement including beyond sexual assault, forced or unwanted sexual conduct, sexual or physical abuse, it adds stalking of any kind. And the OCCA policy does not include anything about stalking. So that's something you may want to include in the OCCA policy. And I don't think that would change the OCCA policy really. And then finally, 3900, which is the last policy, that's your time, place, and manner speech restriction. This is a policy that I think we need to think through. Trustee Van Kraus brought this up, and I think it's important to think about whether or not a time, place, and manner restriction will stand up to legal scrutiny is a question that many campuses are dealing with. I don't know whether it would or not with the current U.S. Supreme Court makeup. I'm not sure it would. It might depend on what the speech was that you were trying to have it on your campus and to limit. So what you're really thinking of here is all speech, limiting it to a certain place, time, and manner on campus. So this, if you think about in the past, and I wasn't at the institution, but I could probably talk about it. I believe we've had, for example, anti-abortion activists in the square there between building 2-3 and the center building with large posters with pictures of aborted fetuses and things like that. Is that something you want to allow anyone on campus, or do we want to put a restriction on where they can be? The issue becomes you also are going to be doing that same thing for something that you may not find offensive yourself, right? So this becomes a restriction on everybody's speech. So anybody that wanted to have set up booths and have what would be First Amendment protected speech, we would be limiting them to a certain place on campus, certain time, certain manner of exercising their First Amendment rights. So I think this is a pretty big thing to consider. That's why it's in the hard category. This is not an easy one. I would suggest that you might consider doing it and having a limit on it. Again, it may be struck down at some point. I don't think that's on the current Supreme Court docket, but I wouldn't be surprised if it, perhaps with the overturning Roe, it won't be as big an issue, because usually that's where these issues came was the anti-abortionist speech on campuses. So, but as bad as the division is in this country, who knows what the next issue will be where we might be facing this. So it's certainly something to consider.
Mike, so we want to let the board know that we do recommend that you have this language. And I also want to make sure that you have some context. And so Dawn, if you could share, there are spaces on campus currently where that they are safe space zones, I believe, on campus.
Yeah, so what I've seen is, the use of that outside that center building, right between building 2 and where you walk into the center building. That's where these groups have historically sort of gathered. I don't know whether or not that has been sort of deemed approved, but that is what I've noticed in my tenure.
Thank you. So I guess I would like to suggest a process to my colleague. Since we have a larger than we've been accustomed to number of policies to this position, what I guess I'd like to suggest is that if a board member wants to call out a policy and recommend a change to it or an amendment or edit to it, why don't we identify those and determine if what remains, the board is prepared to accept legal counsel's recommendation. Yes, Lisa?
What if we have a question about a policy?
Uh,
That would be included in what you're suggesting.
Sure, absolutely. So do board members want to call out by number particular policies? You've suggested that there are at least 3 we ought to have some discussion about. Are there any others that, other than those that have been flagged by legal counsel, that board members are interested in editing or revising? Yes.
Mike, could you repeat the 3 that you're suggesting we have a discussion about? I'll just.
Yeah, I think it's actually 4. So 3820, which is
Uh-huh.
gifts, that has optional language you'll want to look
Right.
at.
3570.
3570, which is the smoking, talking about the cessation and the ceremonial use. 3540, which you may want to add stalking to the list of sexual and other assaults on campus. And then finally, the time, place, and manner speech restriction, which is 3900.
Did you have questions about any of the other
I had
policies?
questions about 3710, 3715, and I thought 3725 did have a recommendation of optional language as well.
Pardon, which one?
3725.
Why don't we just start with those? So is that the first one you have questions about?
So I'll start. Okay, 3710. I'm wondering if I could have an example of what the copyright. I don't understand what those things are, so I'm just asking for clarification about what we're describing. Are we talking about like logos for the college? Are we talking about curriculum that faculty is creating? What are we describing here?
So copyright wouldn't be logos. So logos would be trademark.
Okay,
So that would be a different thing. Copyright is for written materials. So anything that's written that the college would own, they would secure copyright rights to, so that other entities couldn't use it without our permission.
and does that include employees of the college?
When you say include employees,
Like faculty, staff? I mean, like, what would be an example of that? Because I am curious about how both 3710 and 3715 relate to open educational resources, so that we're making sure that students, have consistent access, that we know that's really reduced expenses for students.
yeah, so if an employee prepared something in the course of their employment, Lane would be able to help them secure a copyright so that it couldn't be used without their permission. And so so it could still be used. So in an OAR example, you could allow anybody to use it. It's just a protection so that if somebody wants to use it that you don't want to allow, you can protect yourself from that. So
And the
yeah,
same thing with 3715.
the same thing with 3715,
Wouldn't
correct?
it also protect from some other party attempting to profit off the
Correct.
material?
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's just, anything written for the copyright. Now, the intellectual property, that's going to be broader than the copyright. Copyright is written material. So if somebody wrote a book or an OAR, some kind of an online course material, then the college would secure the copyright for that, and no one else could use it without the permission of the college and the individual that wrote it.
So it won't have an impact on open educational resources.
Shouldn't. I mean, that's usually when people are preparing those, they're preparing them to be used by everybody rather
Okay,
than.
great. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding.
Right, yeah.
Thank you.
And Mike has his hand up.
Oh, thank you. Mike?
What about intellectual content that's created by the faculty? Would that be defined in this policy, or is the president being charged to define how that would be handled?
Well, she is. There's a state statute that deals with that. So ultimately, the college would follow the statute.
Okay,
It's nothing that's going to hamper for example, if a writing faculty wrote a book that's not related to the college, that wouldn't be something we would get a copyright on. They would have to secure their own copyright, and that would be their own. They would own that content. If it was something they prepared for a class or in the scope of their employment, it would be different. The college and the employee would have copyright rights together. But there's
I just have recollection, Steve, you may have had some contact with this. At the university, there being disagreements sometimes between faculty and the administration about who owned what. Something that the faculty member created, but they may have done it as a part of their job or on job time. And that there were conflicts from time to time about who actually owned it. But I don't think we need to get in that level of weeds. I think this policy is just saying that the president needs to define it. So that I'm happy with that.
Can't emphasize how important something like this is, because LTC does not have a board policy on this matter. So to address the very questions that have come up in this discussion.
Lisa.
Yeah, so I guess I also have the same concerns that Mike has in terms of, academic freedom that faculty has, like how we decide, a faculty member's, right to their own intellectual materials, or what did you call it, intellectual property, based on research conducted within their field. And so I get that this is just a policy directing the president to establish procedures, but I would be very curious to know what the impacts of the procedures are going to be.
Since we haven't seen any procedures, it's kind of early. I mean, it's sort of before the fact to try to second guess what those might be. What I guess I'm hearing the board say, Dr. Balder, is the board would be interested in having an opportunity, if the board is prepared to accept the recommendation to adopt these two policies, the board is interested in seeing the proposed policies once they're drafted, or the procedures once they're drafted, and have the opportunity to ask questions about them and understand them better.
And just
Yes.
And just a really brief question: is there examples of procedures that we can maybe look at just to kind of get an idea of like what
in the OCCA library?
Oh, there is.
Yeah. So if you do, you all have access to that, or is it? I know we have limited licenses, so I don't know.
I'm not aware that we do.
Okay. So I'll make a point to send you the proposed OCCA administrative procedures related to both
Okay.
Copyright and intellectual property. And you can take a look at that. Doesn't mean that's what we're going to end up
Well,
with.
it's just
But at least
helpful.
gives you
Right.
an idea as to what they were thinking.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
So is it reasonable to assume, though, that board members are supportive of Lane having a board policy related to these matters, establishing procedures on both with respect to copyright and intellectual property, with the caveat that we want to see a draft?
That sounds right. Rosie, I just had a comment when you had a moment.
Mike, I'm sorry, Steve, I couldn't hear what you said.
I was just asking to get in the queue. I'm not sure if you can see my hand up.
Oh, I can see it now.
But yeah, don't feel bad about that. I know that when you're in the room, it's hard to pay attention to those of us on the video screen. I've seen that. If it's all right, I'll just say that I think with respect to Lisa's concerns and Mike's as well, that, I think we would all hold those concerns. We want our faculty, we want to support our faculty, make sure that they get credit for the work that they do and can take it with them to other institutions if they leave, that sort of thing. My guess is that our president supports academic freedom and her faculty, and I have all the confidence in the world that she's going to look to policies that we can find almost at every institution around the country, because we're not the first, we're probably closer to the last to deal with this. So, I have every confidence that the final document will strike a nice balance.
Thank you. Lisa, did you have other policies that you had questions about?
I'm looking at 3725 and noticing that, let me find it, 3725, 3710. I'm noticing that it also says there's an optional section that authorizes the president to establish procedures relating to managing third-party social media platforms. And that wasn't one of the ones that Mike identified as having optional language to discuss.
Yep, and that one does. I missed it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're gonna take a look at all the ones with optional language. Okay. Which is all the remaining.
According to Austin, we are. Other
No, so
policies,
no,
those were the ones you had questions
yeah,
about?
those,
Other board members with questions about other policies that are not on our list, we now have 5 policies to take a closer look at. Well, then let's start at the beginning, 3820. So do you want to take us back to your recommendation about 3820? Gifts.
Yes, I mean, again, I'm just sort of taking the temperature of the board that I see usually is that you are strongly in favor of DEI and non-discrimination and things like that. So my thought is that you're probably in favor of the optional language, which basically says that Lane will not accept a donation from a donor who engages in practices or policies which discriminate against any person on the basis of, and it's got the laundry list of things that you could discriminate against a person. And then, or when the stated purposes of the donation are to facilitate such discrimination in providing educational opportunities. So, you know, again, it's up to you, but I just, given past practice, I'm fairly certain that you all are going to support that. So.
Is there anybody
Sure.
on the board who objects to adopting that?
Mike has the
I
same.
just have a question. Has anybody bounced this off of Wendy to see if she has any concerns or if there's something that we may not be thinking of that she would want us to consider?
Bounced it off of who?
Wendy Jack.
I have not.
It might be a good idea just to see if there's something that we haven't thought of that she might want to make sure that we consider.
I think that's a good suggestion.
Yes.
I have a question. On the note in italics after the optional section, does this optional language prevent us from accepting donations to, for instance, like the Black Lives Matter Foundation account or program? Like, would it prevent us from accepting donations that are meant to target and improve sort of outcomes for folks who've been?
No. I do think that the note basically though is saying in that instance, I think you consult with legal counsel before doing it. Before, because I think that's really what the note's getting at is sort of things that are tailored to help, when it says tailored to help historically underrepresented groups. So just to make sure, but I think no, the language in the optional section is not going to prevent you from accepting a donation from a Black Lives Matter or any other underrepresented groups.
So my suggestion, unless anyone on the board has an objection to this policy proposal, that we included in what we send forward to the consent agenda in November, but in the interim, follow Mike's suggestion and touch base with our foundation and get a clarification answer to that question. Would that work for board members? Can we get that work? That's okay, good. Let's move on to the next one then. 3570 was the next one you.
Oh. Okay.
Yes, Angela.
Well, after Mike is done.
So 3570, is that the one we're going to?
Yeah.
Sorry, okay. So that, again, that's just adding the nicotine replacement therapy products for the purpose of cessation language and the ceremonial tobacco use exception in limited cases to the smoking and other tobacco use and possession on campus policy. I do think that, and maybe this is, are you going to the fines? Okay, yeah. So I think we probably do need to talk that through as well.
Lisa and then Angela.
Where is the optional language?
There is an optional language. So I'm looking at the old policy. If you look at the last sentence of the first paragraph and the second sentence, which is the entire second paragraph, those two aren't included in the language of the OCCA policy. And I felt like you all should know that and should decide whether you wanted to include them or not, because I felt like that was something that this board probably would want to include, or at least would want to have the option to include.
So you're talking about the last two sentences in board policy 420.
425.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Well, I just want to say that I'm in support of including the language that is around ceremonial use. So I'm in support of that optional language as well as the other recommendation that Michael Blade made.
I see a thumbs up from Mike. How about you, Steve? That works for you? Seems to be working for, are there other questions about this policy? Yes, Angela?
Yeah, I'm in favor of adding that language. I would like to strike the fine language. I'm generally really sort of vehemently opposed to fining people for things, especially vices, especially when fines, we know there's demonstrated evidence that fines disproportionately impact folks who are in poverty or have been sort of historically disenfranchised. So I would really like to remove any fine language. I don't want to have that personally.
Okay, we have a recommendation on the table. Comments from other board members?
Just a question then. When you
Yes,
have, that's a very thoughtful thing, Angela. I appreciate you bringing that up. I'm just curious though, like what would be the punishment then for smoking?
So usually currently what that would be is a student conduct violation, which then would be, would go to Carl Ye to deal with. And I would imagine that, there would be a discussion with the student and hopefully that would resolve it. For people who are frequent violators, I guess the punishment could continue to increase. If they're just absolutely thumbing their nose at the policy and they're in there 5 or 6 times, ultimately, I guess it could get so bad that you could expel them, trespass them from campus. I would find it hard to believe that a person would push it that far, but it's certainly possible.
Do we have examples of, we have a non-smoking policy right now. Do we have issues with enforcement?
I don't think it's a tremendous issue on campus. That what we do currently is it's a student conduct violation. And again, it goes through Carl's office and he deals with that. And to my knowledge, Dawn's shaking her head no. So I don't think this has been a big issue for us. So I would consider it probably wouldn't be going forward either.
Okay. Well, I support Angela's recommendation.
I was going to say I support
Lisa and then Austin.
Bill's recommendation.
Okay, Austin?
Thumbs up.
Okay, everybody else, we're in agreement, remove the fines and add the optional language. Okay, we're moving on to 3540.
I would also, so what Dr. Bolger was giving me the high sign, Wendy sent me a text saying that they don't have, and I just want to make sure I get this right. She says, our foundation gift acceptance policies are cited on the website. We do not accept gifts or scholarships that violate protected class language or which violate laws, discrimination, or other. Nothing in the gift policy proposes in conflict with our existing policies at the foundation. Ours go a bit further in scope, but they should not worry about how the board policy affects us. We're in alignment.
Fantastic.
Great, good to know.
That's great.
Okay,
So the next one's 3725, which is the information and communications technology accessibility and acceptable use, and the optional language does give the president the instruction to establish administrative procedures to enable LCC to lawfully manage its use of third-party social media platforms, and we already have that in COPS. That doesn't mean that Dr. Bolger will want to change it slightly as we look at COPS and see where that needs to go, but we do have a procedure for social media platforms. And so I would suggest that that's probably one that you want to consider including.
Ms. Lisa.
Is a third, give me an example of a third-party social media platform.
Facebook, Twitter.
Okay, so
Somebody, it's a platform owned by a third party. So
Okay.
unless we own, if we had some kind of we don't, internal social media, okay. Yeah.
That's how it
No, no.
starts.
I was thinking, do we have one? I don't think so. If we had an intranet or something that was ours, that wouldn't be a third party social media platform. But yeah, we're talking, all the.
So other questions about 3725?
support the optional language.
You support it. Others, thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay. Moving forward, 3540.
Just a quick question. Mike's twice mentioned COPS. I don't think I know what that is.
College online policies and procedures. It's basically, it has the word policy in there, which I hate since board policies are really the policies, but it's the administrative procedures of the college.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We change its name.
Well, that's coming probably. We can ever get through these, then we can take on those, right? So the next one's 3540. And again, I really like the OCCA policy, but it doesn't mention stalking. And I thought that is a pretty big deal. And again, knowing the makeup of this board, I felt like you all would want to, at a minimum, consider adding stalking to their policy. I'm surprised they missed that, frankly, but.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, just a quick question. So if somebody had a stalking order, against somebody else and to say two students, so student A had a stalking order against student B, both attending Lane Community College, regardless of our board policy, right? That is something that would be enforced by, I don't know if it's city or state law, but in any case, so that would already be covered. So how would this, right? So person, student A could complain that student B was within 50 feet or whatever the limit is, and they have a stalking order and blah, blah, blah. And so they're already covered in that way. So how would this add anything additional?
So you're right. If there's a protective order in place, then law enforcement would enforce that. This is for things where there isn't an established protective order in place. So, stalking is a defined criminal act in the state of Oregon. So we're talking about that, not a violation of a protective order. I think the vast majority of people who are stalked unfortunately, don't get protective orders through the court. Again, unfortunately, I wish they would.
Does this so I guess the question is, does this put the board in the position of having to make decisions, of receiving requests from, students, faculty, staff, whatever, for stalking orders?
No. This just adds stalking to what the, public safety and student conduct would be involved in. It wouldn't come to you.
Okay, fine. But if student A claims that student B was stalking him, and there's no legal order, to already enforce, what do we use to determine whether that's true or not?
The criminal definition of stalking in the state of Oregon. So if the person is performing is the wrong word, but if the person is doing the acts that constitute stalking in Oregon, then they would be in violation of this policy, and public safety would have the ability to
Okay. I think I just need to, all right, well, this is helpful, Mike. I think I just need to read up on what that definition is.
And I can, if you all want that, I can get that to you. Yep.
I mean, generally, just to be clear about my position, it makes sense to me. I just wanted to make sure we weren't getting ourselves into some weird situation of, where the enforcement was going to be difficult, or the judgment of whether or not, such a crime was committed was going to be placed on the board or on the president. That's the stuff I'm looking for. So, but if you gave me the, whatever it is, the definition of stalking, if it turns out that, it's just very obvious and clear, it's we're not going to get ourselves in trouble with gray areas, then I'm supportive.
I have Mike and then Angela.
My recollection when I was at the university, and that's getting to be a while ago, so it may be incorrect or no longer accurate, but the dean of students or the conduct office could also issue no stalking or no contact orders based on student input. And that would be enforceable through the student conduct code.
Correct. And we can do that as well.
Angela?
This policy BP 3540 includes a reference to the legal language for all of these things. I don't know about you all, but I took a deep dive into that before this meeting. So I'm now well versed in the definition of stalking. And so can you.
It's interesting. The ORS actually includes the language of stalking. So why? Yeah. Anyway, yeah. You're.
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't include it. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe that's why. I just, when I looked at our policy and I looked at theirs, and theirs didn't specifically set out stalking. And I felt like since ours did, at some point there was a board, a lane board that thought stalking was important enough to include. And I felt like you all ought to at least know that and consider it before, because if I didn't bring it up and everybody missed it, and then it's not there. You have to go find the ORS 350.255.
Yeah.
So with respect to policy 3540, are board members prepared to adopt this and send it forward?
With the stalking?
I'm sorry,
With or without the stalking?
with
language?
stalking,
Stalking. Yep.
with stalking.
Yes.
Steve?
Yeah, I just had one more question. I tend to follow Angela's lead on these kinds of things, and I have a lot of trust for her detailed review. So I just wanted to hear where you're at on this one.
Oh, I'm.
Go for it.
Yeah, I'm super supportive of adding the stalking language from the prior policy into this policy. I think it makes sense and it's aligned with the ORS and the federal regulations referenced in the policy.
That's basically all I need to know. I'm supportive then too.
It sounds like we're all supportive of this and ready to move to the next one. That would be 3900.
Yeah, so 3900 is the speech, time, place, and manner restriction. And if you look at the way that the OCCA drafted it, obviously, if you're not interested in restricting the time, place, and manner, then you really only need that first sentence. If you are, then you're looking at having the next 3 paragraphs. And I would recommend, if you are, that you also include the last 2 paragraphs. But again, I want to make sure that everybody understands we don't get to pick and choose who we restrict.
Right.
We restrict one, we restrict all. So you don't get to say, well, I don't like you, so you're restricted, but I love you, so you get to be wherever you want, right?
Yeah.
So that's and also you're not deciding where it will be and at what time and the manner, right? That's for the procedure. So you're just directing the president and the executive team to come up with that and procedure to have it in place.
Okay. So I have Lisa, then Mike, then Austin, and Angela.
Yeah, so I am very much interested in having an understanding of how this policy relates to hate speech and whether or not we have another policy regarding hate speech.
To my knowledge, we do not. Now, I haven't looked at all of the policies upcoming on the OCCA list, so that may be there. I've looked at a lot of them, but I don't know that I've looked at every single one. There's still another 100 to go or 80 to go. So there may be that might be a coming attraction. I don't know. I can do that. I'll make a note to do that to let you know. I know we currently don't.
So I guess I would want to know if we do or don't, and then how this policy relates to that situation or concept.
So do you want to comment about that latter question?
Well, if we're going to have a separate policy, then I suspect what we're going to end up with is banning hate speech completely, right? rather than saying that, look, hate speech is not covered by the First Amendment and therefore we're going to ban it altogether, rather than saying, oh yeah, if you want to, you neo-Nazis want to be up in, wherever we say you can be, and you can, have a megaphone and scream, all the hate speech you want. My guess is that's not what this board would want. Again, I'm just guessing, but I think that's probably not what you want. So I would think that what this is for actual valuable public discourse. You may not like what they're talking about, but we're not talking about hate speech here. I think we're talking about, you may be pro-life, you may be pro-choice. That's the obvious one, right? But reasonable minds can differ on how you should speak about that issue. And I just use that one because it's an obvious one. But I think hate speech is a totally different thing. So I would expect to see them, that be a ban.
Lisa, further comment about that?
No, that answered my question. It makes sense to me that there are two separate policies, and if there isn't one in OCCA, I'd like for us to follow up on that in relationship to this. Because it isn't protected by the First Amendment, as he stated.
I will, I'll look and see if there's one, and if there is, I'll forward it to you all just so that you know it's there. If not, at the OCCA meeting in Sun River, they're having a board policy workshop, so I'll have that on my agenda to ask them about.
Great. So again, I have Mike, Austin, and then Angela. Mike?
So during my 40+ years in higher education, this question has flip-flopped back and forth and up and down, sideways, multiple times. And part of what I'm wondering about right now is, I forget the acronym for the college and university legal people, but do they have a best practices recommendation with regard to this policy, Mike?
Are you talking about NACWA?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, but I can look that up as well, as we are members.
Seems like it'd be worth checking into that.
But just to clarify, our legal counsel today is recommending we adopt this policy. So Austin,
I would-
Angela, and then Holly.
Sure. Well, Mike had it then.
I'm sorry, Mike. You weren't done?
Well, I would be reluctant to go forward with this without some kind of review of what the Professional Association of College and University Lawyers recommends.
Okay. Austin?
So I read this obviously before the meeting, and I've read it like 5 times in this meeting, and I'm like, help me understand, like, what's the problem we're trying to solve with this policy? That would be a really big help for me.
So the problem, usually when you see this going to court, what you see is somebody's presentation speech is disrupting the orderly business of the college, which is educating our students, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what they usually use to say we need to be able to regulate, manner, time and place. And that in it, again, it's a lot of it has been either regulating a certain, whether it's regulating conservatives or regulating liberals or regulating pro-life, pro-choice. Those have been the, all of you probably know about, I cannot pronounce the guy's name, the Greek gentleman who's ultra conservative was Milos, yeah, has had trouble getting onto liberal campuses to give his speeches, that type of thing, right? And then you've got conservative campuses like Liberty and things where liberals can't get on there and speak. And so those are the issues that you see usually. Most people that are going to come and do something. Oh, another thing is sometimes you see the services, right? The Army, Navy, the military. You see campuses that don't want military because, whether they're recruiting or they're just having a booth or at a job fair, whatever it is, they don't want military on their campus for that various reasons. Those are what you usually see. So what they try to do is they say, look, we can't keep you because we're a public forum, right? We can't, First Amendment rights, but what we can do is we can tell you where you can be, when you can be, and we can regulate what you can do in your speech. So for example, using the example of the pro-life folks at our campus, putting up the giant billboards in that area where students are constantly going back and forth, and employees, and seeing big giant pictures of aborted fetuses and things like that. you say, well, that's really causing some problems for an orderly, or the orderly education of our students. So we'd like to put you over someplace else. You could still put up all your signs and everything, but it's a little more out of the way where our folks can get to and from where they need to be without being sort of barraged with these awful images.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Angela and then Holly.
Thank you. I think I'm pretty strongly in favor of the last two paragraphs and the first paragraph, of course. I think I'm on the fence about the middle paragraphs, the restricting time and place. I would say I'm leaning more in opposition to those, just because sort of in general, the restriction of protected speech feels a little
Icky.
Did I say something?
Oh, no, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
It feels a little bit close to the line, if not over the line for me. So I feel like I would need some fairly convincing reasons to support it. And I'm hearing that there's been some anti-abortion demonstrations that have been somewhat disruptive, and that could be the rationale for this language. I'm on the fence about that, but I'm very supportive of the first paragraph and the last two paragraphs.
So you're, just to clarify for my benefit, you're saying the paragraphs that start the premises of Lane Community College, starting there and the next two after that, you're not supportive of? Correct. Okay, thank you. Holly?
Well, I see why this board policy is listed under hard, the category of hard. But I want to go back to what Lisa brought up. So am I clear in your response that you said there is not currently a policy about hate speech? A board policy?
Correct.
In NACWA? Am I pronouncing it right?
NACWA, yeah, that's the National Association of College and University Attorneys.
Give me a minute.
Okay.
So, wow, I'm in the history of LCC, there's never been a hate speech policy that included. I noticed here that the following paragraphs are strongly recommended, and strongly recommended is in bold print. I was looking at all the policies and all your recommendations, and I noticed that this one is in bold. I'm on the fence because of the omission of hate speech, and I'm a little concerned that there is not a current policy on hate speech, especially given our climate. So I'm on the fence and not in recommendation of, and it sounds all great and everything without admitting or adding, including whatever, something about hate speech or maybe a whole new policy. This is concerning to me.
Well, we do have policy or procedures, not policy. Well, we also have board policy, although it's not as clear in the board policy about harassment. In the procedure, it talks about derogatory remarks of a racial nature, demeaning racial jokes, racial slurs, physical contact or acts of aggression, being harassment. So I do think that grabs some hate speech. It doesn't grab all of it. It certainly grabs racial hate speech. So we do have a procedure that touches on it, but we don't have a specific hate speech policy or a hate speech procedure. And when you say in the history of, we may have at one point, we don't currently.
So for purposes of clarification, Brett, do you have some information to add?
I was just going to add to the comments about place and manner and why there's a strong recommendation for institutions to have a policy in place. When you receive, and oftentimes it's from external groups that want to come on campus. We have historically allowed everyone to kind of be where the main high traffic areas on campus are. So we haven't gotten called out like other institutions that say, okay, external groups come on campus, but you have to go way over there. That's where we're putting you. Most of our external groups are always in the high traffic areas.
Yeah.
But if you don't restrict time, place, and manner, a group can come on campus with a bullhorn, go right next to a math class, and speak on it the whole time. And the reason the courts have said institutions have a right to restrict time, place, and manner is because our number one mission is to provide an education. And so that's supposed to be what concerns us the most. And we are a public institution, so the public has a right to come on campus. So we want them to come on campus if they want to be on campus, but we should have some rules to make sure that their coming on campus doesn't impede on students' ability to learn.
Excellent.
That was helpful. Thank
That was
you.
really helpful. Yeah.
Lisa,
Yeah, so I did want to point out that as an educational institution, we are allowed to provide certain restrictions in order to maintain the educational setting. You said institution, but my understanding it's educational institutions that are allowed to, yeah. So I had another question gonna back up for a minute. So I'm with Mike. I think I would prefer to wait and not move this to the consent agenda until we have some of the follow-up information. But I'm also curious about, does the time, place, and manner apply to employees? And are there provisions in PECPA that protect certain expression around bargaining and advocacy?
There are. They're not really time, place, and manner issues in PECPA. We couldn't restrict, we wouldn't be able to restrict a bargaining unit from picketing, for example, if it was a strike. We certainly wouldn't be able to restrict them from, handing out literature or setting up a booth, just like any other group that might want to come on campus. But the same restrictions would still be in place with respect to, the orderly provision of education to our students, right? I mean, that's the whole, what Brett just said, that's the whole mission of the college. And so we would be able to restrict a bargaining unit from having a bullhorn right outside of a math class, and screaming into it the entire class. So yeah, I mean, it would apply to everybody. That's the one thing about this policy is it cannot be applied differently to different groups. So everybody, if we came up with a place and a manner and a time, it's going to apply to any group that wants to come on campus and have some kind of a public speech forum. We would have a place and a time and a manner for that.
so Holly, I have Holly and then Angela and board members. We are radically over the amount of time we budgeted for this at this meeting. So I would like to suggest that we not move this last policy forward, but that instead we finish up with the observations or questions that board members have. And then if board members have any other concerns or questions, that you forward them directly to Mike, so that he can begin to work on refining this policy for further board consideration. So I have Holly, Angela, and then Steve.
Well, just for the record, I was not done. with
I'm
my
sorry, I
comment,
apologize.
But moving on, I just have a question. Do every campus, all satellite campuses have this designated area? Or is this only talking about the main campus?
Well, we don't have one currently. You mean, would they?
Oh, we don't, so if this was, yeah, would everyone have it?
If this policy was passed, then yes, we'd have to have one on each area.
Thanks.
Are you done?
If we're not moving it forward, then I don't need to make my comment.
Okay. Steve,
Just a quick clarifying question. If we were to adopt time, place, and manner, which I think I'm in favor of, mostly given Brett's comments. Thank you, Brett. The policy itself doesn't describe what those are. That's delegated to the president. And then we would have a subsequent, discussion as to, to make sure that everybody was, or at least the majority anyways, were comfortable with whatever that time, place, and manner recommendation was. So this is only delegating that authority to the president to, to investigate and come up with a recommendation for that.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm supportive then in that case.
Angela,
I changed my mind. I do want to make my comment. And my comment was that I was looking for justification for those middle 3 paragraphs, and I think that Brett provided that justification. So I'm now in support of them, but I do think that this policy needs more work. I'm glad we're going to take some time with it.
thank you. Yes, Brett.
If you'd like to see a great example of a policy that's already been passed, Lynn Benton Community College, if you go to their homepage and just do a search for time, place, and manner, it shows you how they regulate it on their campus. They have a decibel level that can't be exceeded or the groups can get in trouble. If you pass the policy, I would recommend that President Bolger look at that as an example for next steps.
Cool. Thank you.
I think we can also maybe share that with them too. Maybe we'll share that with the board.
I will share that.
See it.
Okay, board members, we're going to move on. So I'm hopeful that our legal counsel has the direction he needs
I think so.
to bring revised policies forward to the November board meeting. And we'll go from there. So that takes us to discussion item B. Dr. Bolger?
Yes, this is an annual item, I believe, the ethics training and statement, and you've got copies in front of you, hard copies, and I'll turn it over to Mike Blade to talk about it.
Yeah, so just for Mike and Steve, I passed out the board policy, which is the code of ethics, and also the annual affirmation statement, and I'll get those to you all to look at and then sign the annual affirmation statement. Basically the affirmation statement says that you've gone through the training and that you got a copy of the code of ethics. And so I'll get those to you. For those of you who are here, I handed those out. So you should have a copy of BP 2715, which is the code of ethics, and then the annual affirmation statement. I know Trustee Van Kraus and Chair Pryor gave me their signature and date. And if you all want to do that before you leave, that would be great. If not, please get that to me when you get a chance. As far as ethics training goes, I'll try to stay within the 10 minutes this time. Hopefully it won't be quite as difficult. So I just wanted to hit a handful of items. I think this is probably going to be, it's mostly common sense, really. And I think it'll be a lot of replay for most of you. The first one's financial gain. You're not to use your position, your official position for financial gain or avoidance of a financial detriment. It's, for a community college board member, it's, that is a position that's not as right for that, for doing that. But, you certainly could come up with scenarios in your head where it could be done. You're not to do that. So you've got the public's trust here, and you're not to use that for financial gain. You are allowed to get certain things, obviously expenses paid, honoraria, things that, and then gifts is another thing. And the thing to remember with gifts is $50, right? Can't be more than $50. So that's really in your mind, whenever you're thinking about things that you're getting, $50 is really, you don't really want it to be more than that. And again, that doesn't include things like reimbursement and things like that for expenses. But it does include things that you're getting from outside folks. So financial gain, don't use your position to make money or to avoid losing money. And when you're talking about gifts, don't take gifts for more than $50. There's a list of what gifts do not mean, which I think is an important thing on the materials, A through K. So if you have a question, I would ask you to take a look at that. If you still can't figure it out, I'm happy to go over with you. In fact, you can come straight to me if you want, but if you're looking for kind of a reference, that the A through K gives you reference of what isn't a gift. Conflicts of interest. This is one that happens from time to time. You have two kinds of conflicts of interest. You have actual conflicts of interest, and that's where, you are involved or your family member is involved in a company that wants to do business with Lane, right? That's an actual conflict of interest. And then there's potential conflict of interest, right? This is the situation where it might be, right? Maybe they're responding to an RFP or something like that. And it hasn't been settled that there's going to be a conflict, but it's potential out there. You deal with those differently when it comes to discussing and voting on those items. So if it's a potential conflict of interest, the board member shall announce publicly the nature of the potential conflict prior to taking any action thereon in their official capacity. So you still can vote if there's a potential conflict of interest. You just have to announce it. Make sure before you do that, you make sure everybody understands. If there's an actual conflict of interest, again, you announce it publicly and then you refrain from participating as a board member in any discussion, debate, obviously voting, unless the vote is required to meet a quorum. We don't have that very often, but it is possible that your vote would be necessary for a quorum, and therefore you would be able to vote in that instance only. If you violate the conflict of interest policies, there is a civil penalty not to exceed $1,000. So it's not a huge amount, but it is significant enough to get your attention. So just understand that there could be a civil penalty. Bribery. I think we all know that you shouldn't be taking bribes. And there are significant financial penalties for taking bribes. There could be criminal penalties for that as well. So don't take money from somebody to do their bidding. And then finally, public meetings law. And this one's a little, sometimes it can be an issue, especially in this state. It has been. We are subject as a public entity to public meetings law. We are definitely a public body, as that is defined in the statute. The committees and subcommittees that as long as they're advising or making recommendations to the board, they are also public bodies and are subject to the public meeting law. What is a meeting? So you got 4 out of the 7. So you've got a quorum, then it's a meeting if they're going to deliberate, make a decision, or deliberate toward a decision on any matter, excuse me. What aren't meetings? And that's really more important than what is a meeting, because if it's not one of the things that aren't meetings, then it probably is a meeting. So what aren't meetings? On-site inspections, social gatherings, attendance at meetings like OCCA or ACCT, things like that. Social gatherings must be purely for social purposes, and you should avoid discussing official business. So I think in the past you all have had, barbecue at Chair Pryor's house, things like that. That's totally fine. It's not a public meeting. We don't need to take minutes. We don't need to have that broadcast, but please don't talk about official business at those. Board retreats are a meeting. So there needs to be notice, and there needs to be the public meetings law must be followed. You can hold meetings by telephone. As we know through the pandemic, this is not going to be new either. Telephone, video conferencing, but you have to have at least one speakerphone available at the locations that gives access to the public. And then notice. So notice is interesting in this state. Most of the states have a specific notice requirement. And in Oregon, it just says it has to be a sufficient time to give actual notice to interested persons, including news media. Usually we try to give a week, but a week is not required. And I would argue you probably could give less than a week in situations where, for whatever reason, we need to give less than a week. If it's a special meeting, you've got to have at least 24-hour notice. And if it's an emergency meeting, you can have less than 24-hour notice, but the minutes must include the reason for the emergency to justify the meeting. So there are exceptions to the notice rule that allows you to have virtually no notice if it's an emergency. So obviously, if you had a meeting where, and I know this is never going to happen, but if you find out your president has embezzled $1 million and you have an immediate meeting, emergency meeting to take care of that matter, you wouldn't need a 24-hour notice. You can have that meeting immediately. That's just an thing. Any questions about ethics? Yes, Austin.
In regards to conflicts of interest, we have obviously a couple of board members that are public employees. Can you repeat the concept with public employees and conflicts of interest?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, again, it's just whether it's a potential or actual. So if you're working for an entity that has a relationship to LCC, and there's say a contract that's coming up between LCC and that entity that you would be voting on. I would call it, depending on what your job is, right? If you're a middle,
So for instance, like a U of O relationship.
yeah, I mean, if you're a middle manager at U of O and we're going to do a deal with U of O that needs board approval, that's probably a potential conflict of interest. I mean,
Okay.
I don't, because you're really not controlling that. If you're a provost there, perhaps it's an actual conflict of interest, right?
Yeah.
Because you can control it.
Got it.
So I would think that the folks that work for U of O or your situation,
Yeah.
you're not talking about actual conflicts of interest because there are other entities making decisions along with you.
Gotcha. So in those situations are potential, not actual.
Right.
Any other questions for legal counsel? Looks like there are not, so we will move on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.
I just wanted to note that for Mike and Steve's benefit, the affidavit that we're asked to sign is in board docs, so you could print it off at home if that's convenient for you, and you wouldn't have to send anybody anything. It's there. Okay, brings us to a Florence update. Dr. Bolger?
Yes, we are excited to be here in Florence at the Florence Center for LCC and wanted to provide the board with an update. And so we'll ask interim AVP for Career Technical Education and Workforce Development, Russell Pearson, to come up and give us an update on what's happening here at the Florence Center. Russ?
Thank you. So I'll sit by George and Brett. First of all, I want to thank you for coming to Florence. It's always a delight to have the Board of Education here on site. It's been a while for obvious reasons, and we're glad to have you back. So thank you. I also want to thank President Bolger and Vice President Matthews for allowing me to continue my work in Florence while also serving in the interim capacity. And I'm currently serving in the CTE Workforce Development. It's been very useful for obvious reasons also. So thank you for that. It's been lovely. I certainly don't want to read my report to you, but I'll highlight just a couple of things. I first of all want to note that we're almost at the 50-year mark here in Florence. The building, in fact, the Florence Center in one form or another actually started almost at the same time as Lane Community College in Eugene. The position that was on the County Board of Education was instrumental in bringing the services of LCC to Western Wayne County. And this building that you're in right now was actually dedicated in 75-76. So we're almost coming up on the 50-year mark. We are in essentially the same footprint. We haven't added additional square footage, but I think you'll see Tom, the design team, facilities, they've done an excellent job of finding ways to essentially provide us with additional square footage within this footprint. For example, the mezzanine now holds the mechanical equipment. And we've been able to create much more flexible spaces. A lot of you will know I was in facilities management planning myself for a few years before coming to Florence. And I'm a huge fan of flexible space, and I know they are too. And we've been able to accomplish that here. So I'm really pleased with that. I mentioned in the report that we have historically served somewhere in the vicinity between 300 and 400 students annually. That's credit students. We also, kind of unique to LCC, we have a very vibrant non-credit program that primarily meets the needs of the senior population. Florence has a large senior population. The median age in Florence compared to Eugene. Last time I looked, Eugene was somewhere around 34, 35, something like that. Florence this year, I understand, is 61. So quite a bit of difference. And we have a lot of folks who take the whole complement of fitness classes and various interesting current events, things like that every year. And we've been pleased to get back now with post-COVID and with even during the construction, we've been able to offer some of those things. Notably, we were able to serve the Saginaw School District during COVID, even while we couldn't have students in. We got special permission to enable the Saginaw District to serve just a very few students in our north building, the other building, during COVID on a fairly infrequent basis, but it met their needs of the students who otherwise wouldn't have had any internet access in the upriver communities. So they weren't many, but sorry, sub-district staff that and we have to provide that for them. I also mentioned we discovered during COVID that we had an old MOA with LCCA that I don't think any of us really realized had expired. I remember being in a meeting very early in my tenure in Florence where we talked about it. And everyone thought it was a good idea to continue it, and I kind of thought it had, and sort of operating on that basis a bit. We had been previously able to have a separate faculty pool for Florence because we have all these retired community college folks around. And it worked out well for Eugene because the Eugene faculty often didn't want to drive this way and we didn't have budget to pay them. And that MOA expired and we and it made it possible for Eugene faculty to zoom in and teach our students, which was awesome. But I'd be interested in talking about that at some point in the future. We have had a modified schedule of classes this term, in part to enable the construction to continue. We knew we were going to be in all the spaces, but we've been able to do quite a bit and appreciate that and plan to have a full complement of classes beginning winter term. I also wanted to call your attention to the community benefits agreement document that Ms. Crutcher Lewis provided for us. That's in the packet. I got a paper copy too. I've been really pleased with the bond management team's oversight of this and the bond oversight committee, with facilities management and planning's help as well. Lisa Crutcher Lewis has done a great job. When I was in facilities management planning, I had my hand in a few of their projects as well at the downtown campus, health and wellness building, and notably the center building as well. And they've done a wonderful job. We are hoping to be a lead EBOM, existing building operations and maintenance. Lead EBOM sounds like something interesting. Certified project. In the future, it's something you kind of get after the fact. So we're working toward that. We refurbished all the existing wood trim. A lot of the wood finishes and even some of the doors and things you've seen are existing. So they were installed in the 70s and have been refinished and look marvelous. So we're really pleased about that. Some of the construction workers were just really in awe of that old Douglas fir that came probably from this area and the mill nearby that isn't there anymore near Cushman. I also was really pleased with a couple of things that we were able to do in terms of the project. Ms. Crutcher Lewis did a great job of reaching out to the local contracting community. They literally have trained some of them. They helped them understand their insurance requirements, bonding requirements. They've done an excellent job in that regard. And they also reached out to Connected Lane County, and we were able to have at least one. We actually, Ms. Crutcher Lewis was prepared to have some more. So I saw high school vetted one student to apply as an intern here on the project over the summer. His name is Bo. I met him. He's a wonderful young man, and he had a great time getting experience in several aspects of construction at a really high level. So we were really pleased with that too. You'll see other stats in here about all the Lane County participation, the local coastal contracting participation. All the contractors that came from out of town, they spent lots of dollars, and the Chamber of Commerce here in Florence is very happy about that. And we're just delighted that the project has gone so well. We expect it to continue to come to a stunning completion, and we'll all invite you all back for the grand opening at some point in the near future. So thank you for being here.
Lisa.
Yeah, I just want to say I well, it's beautiful, obviously, and am excited about seeing one of our first bond projects come to an end. But I am just really impressed by the CBA outcomes. I mean, 61% of the subcontractors were in Lane County, and 100% of commitment of the subcontractors to CBA standards. And I saw the apprenticeship rates were also very high. And I remember when we were talking about the CBA, having conversations about what would be our goals and, you know, how would we know this was working? And at the time, we discussed very low percentages that we thought might be difficult to reach. And here we are reaching sometimes triple or quadruple some of those standards. So that is really exciting to me. Russ, I know your involvement in this project had a lot to do with that because of your relationship to the community here. So thank you for that. But I'm curious, is Lease Crutcher Lewis, are they doing some of our other projects as well? Because it sounds like they really got that component around reaching out to subcontractors, which I remember Rosie talking a lot about, and educating and like really providing that support. So are they doing other projects for us?
They are also, if you don't mind, I'm Tom Goodhue, Capital Construction Manager. Lease Crutcher Lewis is also on the Building 12 Deferred Maintenance ITEC project. So we continue to work on that. I think, yeah, the CBA goals have been one of those things that I've called them to task on it more than once along the way, and continue to, but it has been, they really thought it was going to be hard here. Some of it is actually the marketplace. The tradesmen had to step up in order to get people involved. So the fact that we're in there has helped the other trades, you know, and the industry as a whole go up. So I credit all of you and previous board members on some of that. That's been a really helpful thing. You know, we're working on it. We're looking at other things, how we can get them involved with the other projects as well. And I'll say our other contractor on the health professions building is also looking at all of these programs. How do we get tours through for our students, particularly in those programs that are construction related, trying to get high school students, you know, that the trades programs involved throughout, you know, these projects where we can really encourage minorities, women, all of that in the trades. The fact that as an owner, we're encouraging it, is starting to really build some momentum out of the unions to put together some, you know, minority crews or totally women crews. We're working on that for ITEC, that we're trying to get, you know, like a full one HVAC crew or something like that, or at least a big chunk of it, so that we can show that and have that as a impetus that students will see that. So it's kudos to you guys. I think it actually helped that we didn't have hard goals, because we could keep ratcheting it up rather than go, great, you made 15%, we're done.
Right.
Or whatever that number was. It's
Great.
so.
Thank you.
There are comments from board members. If my colleagues on the board concur, I would really like to see, I'm pretty sure that Florence still publishes a newspaper, does it not? I would love to see the college take some of this information and develop some of the kind of information that Brett's shop has prepared about the entire college as a whole in terms of its economic impact, and dial that in to what Lane means to Florence and the west part of the county, so that we could perhaps pay to publish that in a local paper and share with our constituents and supporters in Florence what Lane represents. So I wish we could do something like that at your convenience. I recognize. Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I'd just like to commend Russ. I can't imagine how many trips Russ has made between Florence and Eugene over the years. I'm sure it's multiple. And I am well aware of Russ maintaining the well established tradition at LCC of administrators wearing multiple hats. And so commendations to you, Russ. Thanks for your good work.
Thank you, Mike.
Just briefly, thank you to the Florence community for having us. It's always a pleasure being out here, and thank you.
LCC is incredibly important to this community. I learned that immediately on my first day here, and it just keeps coming. So I kind of know that you're here. I told them to stay away tonight for this.
Lady.
Yeah, they're outside waiting.
I think we did that.
Mhm.
Thank you, board members, and thank you, Russ. Thank you, Florence. Okay, moving forward, discussion item D is the Gallup Climate Survey results. Dr. Bolton?
Yes, we are pleased to provide a presentation to the board and discussion about the Gallup Climate Survey results. And we know that the board actually adopted the priority. It's called institutional culture. And this is one of our first steps with regard to taking a look at the campus climate. And so there was a survey done in May of 2022, excuse me, and about the campus climate. And Shane Turner, AVP of Human Resources, is going to give you some background on that and talk to you about the results. Shane?
Thank you, President Bolter and members of the board. I'm glad to be here to talk to you tonight about the Gallup survey results and what we have planned going forward. I'd like to spend just a few minutes to give you a bit of orientation around the report that's in your packet, so it's a little easier to understand. Give you some context around the reporting and the survey that was done. As Dr. Bolter mentioned, we completed that survey in the spring. It was actually in the waning hours of the spring term. And so that did affect our response rate a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the numbers. On the screen before you, you've got the report up there, and the scores are based upon an average of a 5-point Likert scale. And so each of the questions that are asked are 1 to 5. This is very representative, or this is not representative at all. And so our mean score was 3.44. That compared to the entire Gallup database at 12th percentile. And the Gallup database includes everyone who is just taking this survey for the first time, or companies that may have been working on this for a decade or more. And so that gives you a sense of where we're at relative to the entire database, but not necessarily those who are taking this survey for the first time. The questions that we scored highest upon were, there's somebody at work who cares about me, and I believe my colleagues are committed to doing quality work. And we scored lowest on materials and equipment available for me to do my job and opportunity to do my best work. The next page gives you the list of what they call Q12. And these are 12 questions that Gallup has identified as being indicative of a high level of employee engagement. And so when an employee is highly engaged, they the organizations they work for tend to be more successful. If it's a for-profit company, they tend to have higher profits. They tend, yes.
I'm worried that Mike can't hear you. Mike had his hand up. Mike, is that the issue?
No, I've got a question, but I can hear fine.
Okay. I'm glad to take your question now, Mike.
When you talked about the entire database, it was unclear to me, and maybe you said it and I just missed it, but are we talking about that database being restricted to higher education or for any employers that Gallup might be doing surveys for?
That's a great question, Mike. So the 12th percentile was for all companies worldwide for Gallup. They were able to break out a subset for us, the higher education segment. And so on page 2 of the report, if you look at the far right-hand column, you can see our scores, our percentile scores as a function of the higher education market. And so,
Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Other things that I want to point out then, so these 12 questions are indicators of employee engagement. And so the more engaged an employee is, the more successful the organization is, the more profitable it is, the lower the turnover level, fewer complaints, all sort of the indicators of organizational effectiveness. We sent this survey to about 950 employees, and we received about 466 responses, so a little over half. That evidently is on the low side for other companies that administer the survey. We, in particular, had lower participation in our part-time ranks, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing to get part-time employees involved in the responses and how we address the issues that are raised. We also asked 5 additional questions because a portion of the survey we wanted to tackle questions around DEI issues. That was some of the concerns and questions we'd heard raised, and so I'll talk about those in just a minute. The other things I want to talk about on this page specifically are the set of scores here. They call this the top box, and basically this is the frequency distribution for those answers. So if I'm asked the question I know what is expected of me at work, someone answered 1, that would be I strongly disagree, whereas someone answered 5, I strongly agree. And you can see the percentages of those responses, and so relatively higher in that one as compared to, let's say, in the last 6 months, someone has talked to me about my progress at work. Fewer people are recognizing that as a strong suit of the college. The next page talks about the way that Gallup recommends that you approach these questions as an employer. Essentially, it's a Maslow's hierarchy. So it's hard for somebody to sort of feel self-actualized and I grow if I don't know what's expected of me. I don't have the resources I need to do my job. And so the recommendation is that at the department level, you start with those kinds of conversations. What do you need to be able to do your job? How can I, do you have questions about what's expected of you? And then you build up to the next layer of the pyramid to continue to grow success there. And so again, this report then just breaks the questions down in those groupings. As we scroll down to page 8, we have the engagement index. And this is a measurement of our employee population in determining whether they're engaged, whether they're not engaged, or whether they're disengaged. And the analogy that the Gallup folks gave was, imagine all of our employees in a boat, and the engaged folks are at the front, and they've got the oars, and they're digging in, and they're pushing us forward. And then you've got the not engaged folks, and they're kind of in the middle, and they've got their oars in the water every once in a while. They maybe pull the water a little bit, but aren't putting their backs into it. And then you've got the actively disengaged, and they're going in a different direction, or they're spinning us in circles. And the thing that's challenging about this is that number is higher than the engaged. And so it's hard to make progress on college goals because we've got folks rolling in the opposite direction. On the next page,
got a brief question. Yeah, sure. Yeah. What were common reasons for disengagement that like are ways of, let's see, in other organizations, like what are common reasons for disengagement?
Be a lot of things, and it is a lot of things. And the way that we get at that is by asking the question in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different venues. And so I'll talk to you in just a minute about what our approach is going to be, and you can kind of get a sense of how we intend to tackle that and get our arms around it.
Thank you.
So these next sets of questions are the ones that we added to look to the questions of DEI impacts on campus. And these, we have challenges We have some of the lower scores of all of these. And it's going to take a multi-pronged approach to be able to get at what's going to change perceptions here. Some important context, I think, is that 95% of the employee base is has a new representative on cabinet. So 95% of the college employees had a different representative on cabinet 6 months ago. And so that gives an opportunity for a fresh start and for sort of opening dialogues and trust that may have been a barrier for folks coming forward before. The other thing that I think is important to note is the goals that President Bolger is working on are all intertwined. So she's working on student enrollment, she's working on financial situation. Our average tenure at Lane for our employees is 10.5 years. And that means that the average employee has never worked here when enrollment's been growing, when finances have been stable. And that makes it a tough situation when there's competition for resources, right? Because the decisions that have to be made by an organization will inevitably seem unfair to somebody. We have to make a cut, if we have to make a tough decision, that's going to seem unfair and it's going to erode trust. And so if we're able to tackle all of those goals, it's going to help the culture at the same time. It's going to give us the bandwidth to be able to make some progress here. Are there questions about the report, or can I jump to the timeline for how we address it?
Lisa?
So this was only focusing on employees.
That's right.
Do we plan to do something similar with students?
We do. We're actually in conversations with a company to do some focus groups with students to address some of these same issues with regard to DEI, but also with regard to just their experience, the culture of the organization and how it impacts their ability to be successful and persist. Yeah.
Shane, does Gallup have the ability, in addition to breaking out the higher ed sector, breaking out unionized higher ed environments from non-unionized higher ed environments?
Their database wasn't large enough for higher ed to be able to do that. So this database includes public and private and 2-year and 4-year, and it's kind of all rolled into one. A good question. We'll stop share on that screen and then share. Timeline. So this timeline is based upon the presentation that Dr. Bolger gave to you earlier in September. And so for the fall, we're starting the courageous conversations around campus. And those are happening in a lot of different places to give people lots of different chances to share their thoughts. So at the department level, Gallup has managers working on action plans with their teams. So they present their individual departmental results. I'm showing you the campus results, but each department, if there's sufficient sample size, will receive their results and be able to talk to their staff and say, here are the results. What do you want to work on first? What's of interest to you to see us make progress on first? And so in my department, for instance, we started on the materials that you need to be able to do your job with, because that was actually a higher scoring one, but we were close to moving it to 5. That's an important thing that people need to understand, is that every improvement is an improvement in the mean. And so whether we're going from 4 to 5 or from 1 to 2, you're moving the needle. And so we started on that plan, and it's an iterative plan. we're working on that question, then we're moving on to the next one. What do you want to work on next? And so it's an interactive process designed to build trust with the employee, designed to see that we can make progress on these things, and to partner in their own engagement improvement, right? It's not a spectator sport. You have to be, everybody has to be involved in improving it. Now, there are some questions that can't be addressed at the departmental level. We're hearing that those 5 questions at the end are primarily campus level kinds of questions. And so we're asking for feedback from the departments to say, okay, if you could provide feedback to cabinet that you could work on, what could you do? We're planning a campus forum, a town hall forum beginning December to talk to campus with President Bulger around this, and then rolling out focus group kind of conversations across campus with other folks. So maybe you're not comfortable talking to your supervisor, but maybe if we had a faculty member partnered with an administrator in a room, you would feel more comfortable sharing, and there'll be another way to collect that information and bring it forward so that we can act upon it. And so we're developing those plans. We're moving through next fall, making sure that departmental plans are on track. We're going to resurvey. A really important part is sort of checking the pulse along the way and re-administering the survey. So we'll do that in the spring of 2024. And then we'll come back to you and talk to you about how we did, what we found that was working, what things we still need to work on. The last item that I have, have in your packet is the breakdown by employee group. And just because you're probably not familiar with our payroll codes, I just want to fill you in on that. So if you look in the column that says variable values C1, C2, C3, see that in the third column from the left. C1 is our contracted classified employees, our full-time classified employees. C2 are classified employees that are contracted but work less than full year, so 10-month employees, let's say. C3 are our hourly or our 1049 employees. F1 is full-time faculty, F2 is part-time faculty, M1 are our managers, M2 are our confidential management, and then finally you see the breakdown of full-time and part-time. And so as you look at those numbers, in particular the F2 and the C3, you can see that there's pretty low response rate, again, given the sort of the time of year that the survey was administered. And so part of the work that we're doing at the departmental level especially is making sure that we have the voices of our part-time folks included so that they can provide feedback on how we improve the climate. So with that, I open up to any questions that you might have.
I'm going to just offer also, and Shane, thank you so much for that presentation, is that this work is challenging. It's going to be challenging for Lane Community College. So we're walking into this work knowing that it's going to be challenging. It's being done in partnership with a lot of different areas. Certainly our Associate Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is walking hand in hand with our AVP for Human Resources in making sure that this work is carried out in a way that is respectful and that includes a lot of different people. And we certainly intend to include more people on campus. I've certainly found in my observations and talking to people that there are many, many people who may be just on the periphery of these discussions and should be brought to the center of these discussions. And so we intend to do that as well.
Thank you. Comments or questions from board members? I recall, go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead. I just was going to say, I recall our facilitator at our Retreat 2.0 talking to us about the fact that, any organization's cultural climate is a work in progress at all times. It's not like this, you ever get to a point of nirvana and have finished creating the all-time. Although I think I've been responsible for a few pretty spectacular cultural climates myself. Lisa.
Didn't she also say at the retreat, culture eats strategy for lunch or something like that? Or was that you, Stephanie?
Yeah, it's Peter Drucker.
For breakfast.
Famous quote.
Yeah, for breakfast or lunch?
For breakfast.
So I am curious about, like, when you talk about, I really appreciate the, narrowing it down to the departments and providing alternative opportunities, safe spaces for these courageous conversations. I know that's really built into the model. So, but how is the time provided to employees to be able to participate in relationship to their other workload expectations?
But part of it is the way that we impress upon managers how important this work is. So we have been working with them to explain that this should be a part of ongoing dialogue. Like this is on the agenda of every department meeting I have. So it's not a one-time conversation. It's let's check in on where we're at on the plan and let's talk about what happens next. And so that's baked in the cake. They have that opportunity. Now, if that doesn't feel safe, we're going to create additional opportunities, but impress upon the managers that that's important to give that space to be able to participate. We've also talked about anonymous ways to collect that feedback, so that if they can't make a focus group, they can fill out a Google form, right, and get us the feedback, so that everyone feels like part of what we have to do is we have to create some small wins and build on them, so that people start to realize that this is something that we're serious about, and that it's something that's not just a flash in the pan and going to go away. And so I think once we do that, we'll get more buy-in across campus to be able to participate.
So are managers being provided training? Because I mean, they may not know how to do that ongoing. Some of them it may be natural, but I would hope they're getting support and training.
For sure. So we've had training with the folks from Gallup directly. We've had follow-up training at managers meeting. We've had ongoing conversations at managers meetings about questions that they may have. The platform itself, Gallup Access, has training modules built into it. And so, for instance, when you print your report, it has links that provide tips on how to talk about this with your team. And so there's a lot of it built in, but we've added some supports as well. Dr. Stelly's been really sort of visionary in doing that, using one of our staff members, Anna Scott, who's got amazing project management skills. She has worked with his management team to orient them to the reports, to train them on how to process through that. So yeah, we've got that in spades for sure.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate all of this information. Thank you for presenting it. I think for me, the thing that I was most struck by in reading through the report is the really even spread of responses to, if I raised a concern about ethics and integrity, I'm confident my employer would do what is right. There was a really even spread, which I think is concerning. But I also think that struck me because that seems like an area that's top down and bottom up, which means that the board could potentially have a significant role to play in course correction there. So I guess I don't really have a question, just like a hope that we'll hear more about that and have some time to strategize and think about what we need to do to make sure that we're supporting the direction of the college.
Absolutely.
Any other comments or questions from members of the board? Really appreciate the presentation. The first time I encountered this Gallup climate study work was about 15 years ago. I think it's just terrific stuff. I remember listening to a presentation about it at a conference and thinking, holy cow, this is the keys to the kingdom. I mean, if you can get a sufficient number of people in an organization to share their responses to these questions, you got a lot of data to work with, to try to go to work in your organization and find out where hotspots are, find out what the issues are and work on them. So I'm glad we're doing this, and I'm really glad to see this work plan, and I look forward to seeing the progress reports and the results a year from now. So thank you. Board members, we're going to move to our last item, which is a naming opportunity. Dr. Balzer?
We take naming very, very seriously, because when you use the naming opportunity to name a building, a program after someone, then you are doing that in perpetuity for the history, for the rest of the history of the institution. It's a time to celebrate and to also recognize the contributions of individuals to our institution. So we have a proposal for the board tonight, a naming opportunity, and I'll turn it over to Brett to talk about that.
Thank you, President Bolger. Thank you, board. Yeah, before you this evening, a recommendation to honor Congressman Peter DeFazio, who after 36 years in Congress will be not seeking re-election this year, and it's tough for me to picture him going off quietly into retirement. I think he's going to go on to the next phase of life. But Congressman DeFazio, he has been for more than half of the college's existence in DC, fighting for constituents in Oregon and fighting for college students, and has really been a lifelong supporter of the college. We had a committee meet earlier this month to talk about what may be an ideal way to honor his service both to the state and to his district. That committee included Aviation Academy Director Joshua Rickert, Interim Vice President of Academic Affairs Grant Matthews, Legal Counsel Michael Blade, Foundation Director Wendy Jett, and myself. And I don't need to read the entire packet piece to you, but it's tough for me to even think about the fact that I could work the rest of my professional career and we will not have someone with the seniority in Congress that Mr. DeFazio is leaving us with. He has been, every time we've called upon him, an advocate for the college. When we've had issues such as the issue that we had with the Department of Veterans Services a few years ago, he was there to help lead our Oregon delegation to call on the department to resolve the matter with us. We were the third institution in Oregon that the VA came after, and we were the first to resolve our issues. And I think there's a reason for that. The congressman has been a regular on campus speaking to political science classes for decades. He is one of the most familiar faces you would see pouring beer at the KLCC Brew Fest each year. I can go on and on. He has, for decades, refused to take a pay raise in Congress when the government's been deficit spending, and he has donated all of his pay raises to scholarships to help fund students to go to school in his district. Many of those students have been Lane students. And so we, as a committee, discussed what would be an appropriate way to honor this individual who is the longest serving member of Congress in state history. And we felt that we looked at multiple options because of the congressman's strong connection to transportation related issues. For every year of the 36 years he's been in Congress, he has served on the House Transportation Committee. He's currently the chair. He has served as chair of 4 of the subcommittees. And I think it's safe to say that aviation has been one of his priorities, and the Eugene Airport has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of him being in DC. I know Lisa has attended many of the events around town to honor the congressman over the past few months. I think we were at one last week or the week before. LTD, there was one with the city the night before. He was sharing a story about coming back from DC a few decades ago, and it used to be pretty normal that if there was fog on the valley floor, they wouldn't be able to land. They would have to take the plane up to Portland, land at the Portland airport, and then bus everyone back to Eugene. And he went to the FAA and said, well, we need to get the technology in Eugene for the planes to be able to land there. And the FAA said, well, no, that can't happen. The airport's way too small. And so, you know, being Peter, he didn't give up. He did the research and found out that the Eugene Airport had more flights diverted from fog than any airport in the country. And that the money being spent to bus people to Eugene, it just didn't make sense. And so he got the FAA to change course, install the technology that was needed for planes to land in fog. And so every time that you land at the airport and it's a foggy night, and you know, because of the way our climate is in the Northwest and the shape of the valley and the way the fog comes in, that's about pretty much every night of the winter months. And so planes are able to land now at the airport because of Peter. And it goes on like that. But, you know, that not only helps the Eugene Airport, that helps our program at the Eugene Airport and everything flight related out there. A fee that he invented, that's a little fee charged to every ticket that's sold for airline passengers, helps fund upgrades at airports around the country. A lot of those fees have been collected to help turn the Eugene Airport into what it is today, which is very much driven the need for additional pilots, driven the need for people to work on those planes, and again, having an impact on our program. And most recently, he championed an earmark for that program for $500,000, which is going to help purchase a couple new planes to serve our students for years to come. And so with all of that, we felt something aviation related was the most appropriate way to honor the congressman. We discussed naming airplanes after him because he championed the earmark. But as we all know, equipment comes and goes. And so we thought it would be more appropriate to name the building that the students learn in after him. The other consideration was just naming the program after him. But after we looked into that, there were a lot of issues related to that, with having to go through a lot of hoops with the FAA, the VA, the state. I mean, we're basically changing the name of the program. And so we settled on a recommendation that the best way to honor him would be to change the name of the building where flight education takes place at the airport. And so that is our recommendation to you. Based off the COPS policy on naming, it does recommend that you use just an individual's last name so that it makes it a little easier for everything from signage to people being able to memorize what the names of the buildings are. And so that's why the recommendation that we have for you is to name the Flight Tech Center at the airport the DeFazio Flight Education Center.
Tiger of the house.
Tiger of the house.
Comments from board members? Obviously, we don't make any decisions at work sessions, and the board will revisit the question at its November meeting, but this is an information item. Yes.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that I'm super supportive of it. Thank you for doing all the legwork to bring us this recommendation. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Any other comments from board members? Yes.
Will this be in the consent agenda or will it be an action item?
What's your pleasure?
I guess I mean, are we trying to surprise the Congress?
Well, that's sort of my,
Yeah.
that's why I hesitated. I'm not sure I want to put it as an action item. I think I'd rather just kind of slip it into the consent agenda so that we can choose our time to honor him by unveiling this.
Do you know?
I've been in touch with his staff.
Okay.
I did not want to get before the board, and so I've just said that the board was going to have a conversation about ways to honor the congressman. They know that we would like to most likely welcome him to campus for an event sometime in the future. We'll work with them to identify when would be an ideal time to get him on campus.
At work?
Yeah, or I mean, out at the airport, I assume.
Yes.
Okay. I think you have enough direction to move forward. That brings us to our closing items, future meeting dates and agenda items. I don't know that we have those in our, yeah, they're in your board docs packet for your edification and review.
I had a question.
Yes, go for it.
I was just hoping that we could get, I lost my, I've got too many windows open on this computer. I'm wondering about our visit on November 15th from Scott Van Pelt. And if we have an agenda for the day that board members might attend the keynote address as well as some of the community forums.
And we can get that to you.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any other board member comments or questions for the good of the order? Is that a, Holly, I'm looking.
No, I pass.
You pass, okay. You know what that brings us to?
What?
We're adjourned.